Good. Yeah, Scott, I can go ahead. I don't, when you say call to order, not familiar with what that is, but in any case, it's a Public Works Committee agenda or meeting, February 24th, 2022. We've got a couple of discussion items, but we're going to start off with Public Works update that Scott was going to give, State of Public Works. And then the two discussion items are a sole source purchase for an upper bearing assembly at the wastewater treatment plant that we'll see at the next council meeting, and then a progress report on the tsunami evacuation tower design and costs. And then if there's any additional items, we've got some time for that too, and then we need to schedule the next meeting. That's what I got. Scott, do you want to go through the update that you gave last night too, I think?
Sure, absolutely. So obviously Public Works, I just want to let everyone know with our acting director, our former director, Nick Bird out, and our acting director, Robert Lund in, none of these projects that we've been working on have stopped. If anything, they've actually accelerated in pace. I just want everyone to know that while Robert's on, Robert's done a fantastic job of leading this team. Not to put any pressure on him to become Public Works Director, because it's not something he wants, but I'd love to have him, of course. He's done a great job, but I'll just give you sort of a rundown of the major projects that are on Public Works' radar, and there's a couple minor ones too that we can talk about later. But the first is the erosion study analysis, and the city just recently solicited bids from consulting firms. The area of expertise that we were looking for was coastal engineering, and the project's basically to conduct a coastal erosion analysis for the southern portion of Ocean Shores. And the analysis that we're doing there, it helps to build off some of our previous work to kind of develop long-term forecasting predictions and sort of better understand how erosion is impacting the city, and especially in areas that are down by our wastewater treatment plant. Better understand the reasons for it and the mitigation alternatives. And we, as I said, the firm of Mott MacDonald LLC, they won that bid, and that bid will be brought to council for confirmation. Second major public works activity is the tsunami tower. Obviously, the school levy to build a tsunami station at the elementary school here did not pass, and that leaves us as really the only viable alternative for the tsunami tower. So the city of Ocean Shores, we're hoping to finalize our contract negotiations with Deegan Kolb to complete the kind of preliminary structural engineering design for the tsunami tower. The conceptual design, just so the facts are out there, it's going to be an 800-person evacuation tower, safe refuge elevation of about 50 feet. And we hope to be bringing that contract also to council for your edification and for you to vote on it. Another one that's moving forward is the Ocean Shores fire break. That's scheduled to start on Monday. This phase 2 of that fire break at the Polynesian Hotel. We're going to be conducting work in the wetland buffer areas. That'll occur over the course of the next possibly 2 weeks. And then in August and September, the work on the fire break will commence in the wetland areas after some of those wetlands have had an opportunity to dry out. And in addition to that, the city will be recutting all of the work that was done in that first one, but this will, with the end of phase 2, finalize the entire fire break for all the hotels on Hotel Row. Adjacent to that, another public works project is the High Dunes Trail. So we're actually moving forward on that quickly as well. State Environmental Policy Act process has been completed, and Department of Public Works is now engaged in the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act phase, and the permitting phase that helps determine sort of our right-of-way and jurisdictional issues and jurisdictional elements. There's going to be a meeting, if that already didn't happen, I don't know, at the Best Western to discuss the trail going through their property. Did that transpire today, Robert, or is that tomorrow? The Best Western. That already happened, okay. And a preliminary alignment map for the trail should be ready by mid-March. And the goal is to get it out to bid, the trail itself, around June of 2022. And that's our goal, so long as there's no sort of archaeological findings or endangered species holds up with the High Dunes Trail. Another big one, the Oyhut Ditch, working with that to sort of remove our vegetation from that ditch. The preliminary permitting has already begun, with the lead agency being the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. Big issue is the Olympic mud minnow, in addition to other Species Act, but that's the real one we have to keep out because it's on the Washington State Endangered Species list. And following preliminary approval from Fish and Wildlife, the city will begin the JARPA process, which is the Joint Aquatic Resources Permit Application process via the Corps of Engineers. And then, of course, crosswalks, which Mr. Peterson's been instrumental in leading. The city is waiting still on the TEIB, the Transportation Improvement Board money, to sign a contract with the city and allocate the funding that would be needed to enter into a professional services agreement to do the design of the crosswalks. They're scheduled to be next to Playtime Family Fun across the street there, but the design will require a survey to be completed by SCJ Alliance. And ideally, this process of the crosswalks would be completed by the end of summer, but that there is the caveat that that depends on the property owners on both sides of the street, granting us the proper legal authority to move forward. Go ahead, please, Frank.
I was curious, who made the determination where the crosswalk was going in?
Was that, I'm trying to remember how that got to council. Did we bring that to council and gave them showed them the three options for where they were going to go originally?
We've seen options, if I remember correctly. Bob, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but we were waiting for surveys to be done, and it never came back for a vote for the council where to locate it. I'm just curious how you came up with a spot.
Robert, do you have any answer on to how, if that, is that a final location or is that like a preliminary final location? Is that an ideal location based on if we get the permitting?
I thought everybody kind of voted on it.
I can't remember. I know we showed it. I recall showing it.
Yeah, Scott, but I wasn't there, and I'd have to ask Sarah to kind of help me find the notes and see where what the thumbs up or thumbs down was. I know it was presented.
It was presented. I just don't remember us making a determination where to put it. So that's why I thought I'd ask Bob, but if you remember.
Councilmember Peterson, do you remember that? You're muted, Bob.
Personally, I think that is the ideal spot, but I do kind of remember a thumbs up thing.
That's yeah, exactly. But I couldn't say that with any authority. Like
right.
So it's something we can look into. I thought that was sort of like I thought we did an online survey vote as well, and it came back most people on that online survey wanted it there, but whether that was like the be all and end all of it, I can't say.
We should just do another thumbs up or thumbs down for it this coming meeting.
We could do that. Robert, would you be prepared to address that if we did that or no? Or is that?
The only thing I don't know is how specific the funding application was as far as the location. That would be something I'd have to talk with Sarah about. If when we applied for the TIB funding, if we said we're going to put a crosswalk right here, or if we said we're going to put a crosswalk in this general area and we still have flexibility with the funding. So I need to check on that.
Well, Sarah's on the line, and I don't want to put her on the spot if she doesn't know that off the top of her head.
Her finger.
So, but she's always good at coming up with information really fast. So without putting you on the line, Sarah Bisson, do you know the answer to that?
Unfortunately, I do not. This, I believe, was submitted with the State Capital Improvement Plan, TIB plan. So I will have to refer back to that because I'm not quite sure how the site location was selected.
Okay.
But as far as backup materials, Scott, there's there was an initial report that was done, and then a second report that kind of wrapped the survey into it and sort of made a suggestion. And I think it's easy enough to, if you, I don't know how you would phrase that in a council meeting, if it's whatever it is, but it would be easy enough to work with Sarah to put that around one more time, just to be sure that we're sure.
Okay, let's just agree to look it up, because it was well over a year ago now, I think. And I recall,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I recall some of the debate, and I recall the survey and results being shown, and I recall our 3 options, and I just can't remember if we did a thumbs up, we want to move forward on this period, or if thumbs up this site makes the most sense. I can't remember. So we'll try to find that out for you, Frank.
Yeah, I don't remember either, but I don't want to slow it down.
Okay.
We need to get it done like 2 years ago. So
Exactly.
Okay, and then the last thing that is that it? Okay, wait, let's see.
Let's see. Chancellor
Chancellor and Shoal Street. Okay.
Point Brown. Yes.
Yeah, this what we're looking at here. What I wouldn't know is if this may have been done at a later date than the presentation from SCJ.
Just place it.
Well, there's a lot of space between. There's a lot of space between Chancellor and Shoal Street. Shoal Street is up by the Moby Dicks, I believe.
It is.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, but we would have purposely done that with a grant application in case like conversation happened and we wanted to move over a block, so that we have some flexibility in the funding. We wouldn't be just tied to something. So I suspect we would have been a little general in the funding application, but it'll take some research to see exactly what Nick presented in SCJ presented to council. Like I said, you don't want to hold it up, so we'll dig that up and I'll send it.
Yeah.
You guys.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Robert. All right, and then the last thing I had, just sort of council's edification, just so they all know that, there's obviously the truck signs on Dolphin, no truck route signs. Those have all been placed. 8 have gone out, and the OSPD has been sort of issuing warning tickets for trucks, and people are starting to observe it. So just letting you know that's done, and that's sort of our big public works projects, but there's some smaller things, and I'll just turn over the meeting to Robert now.
Okay. Were there any on any of those items, because I'm going to just go into discussion items, were there any questions or comments on any of the 5 items that Scott presented?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. Then I'll touch, because some of you I think have already heard this at the finance committee meeting, but the next council meeting we do have another sole source purchase plus budget modification for a screw pump bearing assembly at the wastewater treatment plant. So this is basically a part that moves water up after the grit system and gets it up high enough that it can go through the clarifier afterwards. And it's just that there's 3 positions there. There's one's vacant and 2 pumps are in service. And we've got one in good shape. It's running. The gearbox and this bearing assembly have been replaced in the last couple of years, but pump number 2 is overdue. It's spitting grease, and it's currently offline. So this part is kind of proprietary to that equipment. They're the ones with the plans, and their machinists are the kind of the ones who make it. And the labor, the request is for parts only. Labor will be the wastewater treatment plant crew will do the installation. And then there's some language in here about why in this case we believe a sole source is justified, and the total expenditures $18,651.74. So that's the screw pump bearing assembly and just trying to kind of support the wastewater crew and giving them the parts and the tools they need to do their job. There's not a lot of people working down there, and does recent retirements and that kind of thing too, that they're when they do something in house, they're working around that too, besides their regular duties, keeping the wastewater plant going. Are there any questions or comments or anything you feel we should present differently? Frank?
Just have a question. Does that price include the rebuild of the old one that you're going to have ready on the shelf, plus the new parts?
That is kind of up in the air right now. The last time in 2019, when they did the first position, it wasn't in a condition that could be rebuilt. Just, I'm not sure how they checked that, but it just wasn't gonna, it wasn't worth doing. But yeah, this price does not include rebuild parts, but my understanding from talking with James is that we don't really know if it's worth doing yet. And if it is worth doing, those parts are something that are just, they're almost off the shelf. You wouldn't even necessarily get it from that company because they're bearings and that kind of thing that are part of the whole assembly. That's how he explained it to me, but yeah, it doesn't include those parts. And I think they would just be dealt with within our regular budget if it's something you can rebuild. Otherwise, I imagine the next budget cycle we'll probably, if it's up to me, I'll be asking for, for some of these things we just need to have on the shelf to have them available so that we don't burn out a gearbox. Because
sure. No, that's fine. I was just curious, and thanks for answering my question.
Anything else on that? Okay. And then, so I'm going to move on to the tsunami vertical evacuation structure. And the presentation here is basically the kind of a financial summary of the project. Just to give you, I don't really have the background on the project as far as like when we selected a site and all of that. What I know is kind of from the point of we've got the funding. We went out, we let a request for qualifications for firms to design this thing. Unfortunately, we're not legally, in some of the grant stuff, this would have made a good design build, but we're not really allowed to do that. So it's design bid build. But we led a request for qualifications and we received back 3 statements of qualifications. One from Deggan Kolb, who did the preliminary work for the city. One from P&D Engineers, which is a marine engineering outfit. I actually did a lot of work with them up north, but not this group down in Seattle. And then YGH. Those were evaluated. We scored them as a group. When I say we, Public Works, Crystal, Nick, Scott, Sarah. And then we had interviews. We wound up interviewing all 3 firms, and then we rescored them. It's kind of a ranking system that I use so that individuals can't skew the score very easily. And Deggan Kolb came out on top there. So we entered, this was back in like September or July, into negotiations with Deggan Kolb to define what their scope was and what their fee would be. So they are in the row engineering. That's their scope, which is architectural engineering and geotechnical is actually lumped into there. What we saw was that if you look at the construction budget, which is about $4 million, it's about 15% of that. As we talked about at the finance meeting, I don't want to make the case for Dagan Kolb. I think they're a good firm. I think if we're going to go to get additional funding, this is the name you want on that application, because in the tsunami design world right now, they've kind of got more experience than everyone. They are the most qualified, but you know, that's a big number there. Geotech is the soil stuff is really of concern here. We've been looking at the soils report for the Ocean Lakeway Bridge that WashDOT did before it was built. It's besides the natural gas pocket that blew the stem off the rig when they were doing that study, it's just the soils here. The funding application was sort of prefaced on what was happening at Shoalwater, which Dagan Kolb is the design engineer on, and Ocean Shores, where our soils aren't as good. It's going to be more challenging. This really is a custom kind of design because it's what's called a risk category 4 structure. So it's more like a hospital, police station. It's a structure that you don't just want to escape from after the earthquake, and in this case, a tsunami. So we're throwing a big earthquake at it, then a tsunami, but it's also a structure that's intended to be serviceable after the earthquake. So like a lot of buildings, yeah, they're designed for the earthquake, but they're not necessarily meant to be, they should be repairable after the earthquake, but it may not be cost effective to do so. That's kind of what they say there. So, Dagan Kolb's coming up with custom earthquake parameters, whereas ordinarily you would just put in your zip code and come back, it's 1.6 earth gravities and away you go. So that's a little bit of the justification of why this is a pretty hefty design fee. That's Dagan Kolb. And that scope is through bid services. So any questions that come up during bid, they'd be responsible to answer. And then there's some parts of those that I'm pretty sure are going to happen, but we're not sure yet. A few environmental things that we wouldn't pay for unless they actually were necessary. And then like with the geotech, if there's indication, if your code decision tree says you need to check for lateral spreading, which is the soil basically settling out on you, there's some extra fees associated with modeling that, accommodating it in the design. So that's engineering. There's also an item in here for peer review, which that is peer review. It's basically just what it sounds like. We're hiring this firm independently to review Dagan Kolb's design because it's a risk category 4 structure. That's a code requirement that there's this other firm looking over your shoulder. It's really kind of a procurement from Michael McGibney at the building department, because this is kind of beyond a prescriptive design that he's used to looking at. So he gets a report that's stamped that says we reviewed these plans and these specifications and these calculations, and we're in general agreement with them. So the firm that we'll be proposing there is KPFF, which was actually they were part of the YGH team that proposed on the project. So I'm a little bit, I'm actually pleased to see them there because maybe in the next tower, they'll design it instead of Dagan Kolb. And then the third item here is a geotechnical drilling contractor that needs to be hired independently by the city. So it'll be like a limited works bid we put out for a firm to perform that, because the design engineers don't carry the appropriate insurance, et cetera, to hire a drilling contractor. So that'll be a third procurement here to get a tsunami tower going. So the tower is very much based on the Shoalwater efforts that are in projects. Rogland's construction is there's actually physically a tower there now. It's hard to imagine why it costs as much as it does when you look at the pictures, but a lot of it's underground. You see this tower that's 60 feet tall, and there's 50 feet of auger cast pile underneath it. And they're talking about maybe deeper here because of our soils. But moving over to the column, there's an overall cost estimate column that kind of lines out design costs in bold at the bottom. FEMA grant at 75%. That's the portion of design that FEMA is paying. And then we've got Department of Commerce money to meet, to go 50-50 on the city's match, our 25% of it. So as we're going through design, should council decide to pursue the project and use Deg and Kolb, if that's what we decide, when we get to the bid phase, our liability, what we put into the project, if we decide not to proceed, the cost estimates are looking a lot higher than this $4 million, then our liability is about $97,000. That's what we would have spent. But Scott and John and Sarah have had some pretty lengthy discussions with FEMA that when we get to about 65%, we'll have a 65% updates on our cost estimates. There's a good chance that we'll be looking for additional funding through FEMA. And there's actually some benefits there I think Sarah could get into as far as what the overall project would cost us. Might actually be cheaper that way. But where we're at right now to move stuff forward is kind of like I presented. And then I know what I know. Sarah's got a lot of information on this. So please, if you've got questions, I'll try to answer them, or I'll get back to you later. I see you, Frank.
Is this $4,789,000? Is that the original cost when we first decided to move on that?
Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the total project budget. So that's like the FEMA package. So that includes the 75. It includes construction, or it's supposed to. And that's 75% FEMA, and then the 25% city match if you split it up that way.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is I heard that this, with the materials having gone up since the original cost was put out there, and we got the FEMA money. I heard it's gone up quite a bit, like maybe $2 million more for this tsunami tower.
How many?
I heard it's gone up quite a bit, like 2 million from our original, FEMA grant.
Yeah. Well, first thing I think I'd stress, and I'm not trying to like sell the tower, I'm just going to tell you what I know,
Sure.
is that you're right. There's been those escalations in construction costs since this estimate was put together. I think there's probably a couple of little things that the designer missed, as far as maybe not construction, but related, but who's watching the contractor type of stuff. So there's that part of it. So yeah, exactly. You've got your escalation in construction costs, and the other part of it is, as I alluded to, is geotech. This system was envisioned, and not everything is linear necessarily. It just because you double the size doesn't mean it's double the price necessarily. But those footings were assumed at like 50 or 60 feet embedment, burying the earth. I was hearing numbers thrown at me like more like 150 or 200 feet. So in the Shoalwater Tower, if you're assuming everything's linear, that's kind of where that number came for me. It might be 1.5, 2 million more. There's a per square foot price. You go from 400 people, 100 people, different square footage. And then the geotech's, it's a concern because that's a $300,000 or $400,000 bid item at 50 feet. And so when you take that Shoalwater bid tab and you take, these footings, if we can't come up with something more creative, there's an escalation there beyond just the construction indexes. So, and I think Sarah could speak to this better, and that's why I kind of phrased this. And there's this kind of stop point in design. Do we keep going forward? This is what our liability will be. from what I've heard, if you're at that point in this, say, we're gonna specifically, but there's an independent construction estimation firm that's providing numbers to Dagan Kolb as they go along. Now I haven't worked with Cummings, but I haven't worked with them before, but we're updating those numbers really just to start with, to get a snapshot of, hey, what does this look like? You have the Shoalwater bid and stuff, update your numbers and don't be too proud of them. You know, tell us what we really think it's going to be. And then 35 and 65, I think, to keep seeing what that number is. But the way it's been communicated to me, and it doesn't quite show it here, is that stop point, or at 65%, if we go back to FEMA and say, well, they really want to build these towers, but the city of Ocean Shores doesn't, you know, we're not coming up with another $1.5 million for this. What can we do? And they've indicated, and it's no promise, I don't think any of us wants to say like, this is a for sure thing, but what we'll be doing is applying through a different funding stream. And I don't know if we would just deobligate this grant and take it all from somewhere else, but it was explained to me that those systems have a better match. Right now we're at a 25% match, and once we burn through the commerce money, we're just at our 25% match in construction. So there's some that might be a 12.5% match through construction. So actually the overall liability to the city would be less if we went ahead and constructed it. That's how it's been communicated to me. Does that answer?
Robert, I'd like to interject here if at all possible.
Yeah.
Really, there's no firm answer as to what if there is a potential overrun at this point, because it's a moving target. As we go through the geotech, as we face these obstacles, yes, there's a potential for a cost overrun as we foresee it. And we're probably erring on the side of caution if we were to say $1.5 million, but hopefully that won't end up being the case as we move forward. So really, we won't know what the actual cost overrun will be until we're at the approximate 65% design phase. And then we have the potential to consider the size of our tower and other funding streams.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's exactly the thing. To be honest, my numbers, Dagan Kolb's not exactly going to agree with me, but they're consultants, and I want you guys to, you know, kind of see what I think the impact would be. The tower is itself, it's a non-conditioned space. There's really no bells and whistles here. I mean, it's really, there's not really any comforts. Those things are really places for us to, you know, have first aid kits and whatever else in the future. That was the direction I had before, but it's not, there's nothing fancy besides just the materials and the foundation system going into it. I don't, and that's kind of been a little bit of a struggle with Dagan Kolb, is they like to have a lot of meetings and this and this and that, and we've severely reduced those. I think they had their opportunity to show off on the Shoalwater Tower, and we'll have meetings to a limited extent, but in the end, I don't know. They just designed Shoalwater. This really should be a pretty straightforward design.
I was just curious. So we're going to have to be 65% into that $97,000 before we know if we can afford to build this project. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, we'll have a snapshot at really just as soon as we get started, or as soon as we're at geotech. The $97,000 is that's actually a percentage that would take you all the way through bid. If we actually, because you could just blindly go forward and bid it and then go, wow, I don't want to do that to contractors, because it takes a lot of effort to bid one of these. I don't want to bid it without kind of having a better idea of what it costs. So so you'd see that right around the beginning when we're done with geotech, we have a firmer idea of what the footings are going to look like. And then around 35, then 65. So the thing is the consultants spend on the money isn't necessarily linear. So I'd rather just present it as $97,000, because if I'm at 35% design, that doesn't mean I've spent 35% of the design fee. You know, geotechs, there's some upfront stuff like geotech and that kind of thing that wouldn't necessarily make it just like, well, we stopped at 35% and it's 35% of $97,000. I'd say that you're correct that which you get somewhere closer to the end of this, you're going to be somewhere around $97,000. You might be a little south of it if you decided to abort at 65% or something, or the funding situation changed. But our intent is to also, you know, not only keep you guys apprised of what these look like, so there's updates and it's not a surprise later, but that we're also involving FEMA in that discussion, so that when we get an estimate, we're starting to throw out the warning bells to them, so that they're able in their meetings and their correspondence to say, hey, it looks like Ocean Shores is, keep it on the radar, keep it on the radar. So they're keeping an eye out for other, you know, funding streams as we get closer.
All right, well, thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Frank. That's so that's kind of the spiel on the tsunami tower. I do have the final scope and estimates from Dagan Kolb. That's these numbers, and also from KPFF. So it's more or less ready to, they both need to be taken to council for consideration. And I think the earliest, I think, would be the first meeting in March that we would take it there. But I do appreciate the input from the finance meeting and this meeting, because it kind of helps us to at least have the information in the council packet that everyone can see what we're doing. And it's, my perspective is, you know, different than what your guys' is. So I appreciate the input.
Do you want some feedback from us? Like, I'm comfortable having it being brought forward.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Is there side? You may vote yes or no, but if it's going to be presented, you got enough information to make a decision. Yeah, that's what I got. And you know, yeah, but our plan would be to take both of these to council, the first meeting in March, and see where the cards fall. Okay. That was it for the agenda items. As far as additional items, was there anything that you guys would like to discuss while we're all on the line? Okay.
I was going to say crosswalks, but you already did it.
Yeah, no, it's on the list, and it'll eventually it'll be a definite. We already did it, and there'll be a crosswalk there. We can all.
All right.
I gotta get sidewalks, Bob.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you, council members, for joining us, and Angie, and Sarah, and then the other Sarah. So thanks, everyone. Take care and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye, guys.